Welcome. My name is Garth A. Fowler, and I am the Associate Executive Director of the APA's Office of Graduate and Postgraduate Education and Training. Today, I will be your host for our latest installment of How Did You Get That Job? A webinar series that features live chats with individuals that have psychology degrees and who are using their training and skill sets in interesting ways in numerous careers in many different fields. This webinar series is based upon and borrows its name from How Did You Get That Job? From the popular column in APA's monthly magazine, The Monitor on Psychology. The magazine is a benefit of membership of the APA, so if you're not a member of APA, I really encourage you to join us, and you'll find that there are many benefits like the Monitor that are available exclusively for our members. Here's how we're going to manage our short time together today. The webinar will last approximately 30 minutes, and it's going to focus solely on questions that either I've come up with or you, our audience, submitted when you registered. There will be no formal question and answer session afterwards. Instead, during the webinar, you can submit a question by using the questions box, which is located in the webinar control panel. And as time permits, I'll try and select some of those questions for our guest. So let's get started. Our guest today is Dr. Paul Eckert, who plays a key role in maintaining and improving the safety and efficiency of commercial aviation and space transportation at the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA. So before we get started, I'd like to actually just take a moment to thank Dr. Eckert for giving us some of his time today to answer our questions. So welcome, Dr. Eckert.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
No worries, thank you. So excellent, let's get started. And so I'm going to start with just a really basic question, and I want you to tell us a little bit, or tell us what your job title is, and then tell us how long have you had this particular job?
I'm the manager of strategic planning for the FAA. I've been in this job for about 2.5 years. I've been with the FAA for a total of 5 years.
Excellent. So been there for quite some time. So moving around through the administration as you got in through the front door. So tell us a little bit, what is your typical day like? What is it that you do on a regular basis? What are the things you find, you walk in and this is what's going to occupy you for most of your day?
Well, that's a great question. I am a supervisor, so I supervise a number of staff. So one of the things that I do is to meet with my staff, both in staff meetings and also in one-on-one meetings. And I try to maintain a balance between focusing on their career development so that I'm supporting them not just in terms of getting the day-to-day jobs done, but also in terms of developing as professionals. And then also, of course, we do focus on a number of projects that we have. So that's a portion of every day. And it isn't just the time with people, it's the time planning what I'm going to talk with people about, and then emails and so forth. The second thing, which is a key part of my job, is maintaining contacts with other people within my group. I'm in the Policy and Plans group, which is in Policy, International Affairs, and Environment. And so there's pretty close coordination with other staff at the executive level, down to my level, and then at the analyst level. And so that's a very important part of the day. Then I also coordinate with people from all across the agency. One of the things about my job is in strategic planning and in the office that I'm part of, we deal with all aspects of what FAA does. And there are very few people, except in the administrator's office, very few people in the agency who see as broadly across the whole range of activities as we do in my office. And so that is a key part of the day, maintaining those relationships and responding to needs that arise elsewhere. We also coordinate between FAA and the Department of Transportation because FAA is a mode within the Department of Transportation, and there are many others that deal with highways and transit and seaway and so forth. And beyond that, I have, yes.
I was going to say, so it sounds like there's quite a bit that you do. A lot of meetings, a lot of one-on-one engagement, a lot of reading emails and passing it back and forth.
Yes, there's a lot of that. I hate to mention the email challenge because everyone, no matter where they are, has to deal with that. But I must say that there are hundreds of emails coming in daily, and so learning how to manage that is one of the key skills that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Oh, perfect. Well, that's a nice lead into the next question, which is, what are some of the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you find you use on a day-to-day basis? What do you draw upon as a skill set, or you realize there's a minimum competency in something that you need to do in order for you to do your job successfully every day?
Well, the most basic skill is time management, and as I think most people would recognize, that is not just making lists and trying to follow them. That's starting with the big picture. Why am I in this job? How does this job fit into the rest of my life? Within the job, what are my top priorities? What are the things I need to focus on? And what are the things that I should not spend as much time on? And those decisions are constant throughout the day. A second one related to that is multitasking. And I guess psychology research is demonstrating more and more that when people try to do the same thing at the same time, they don't do anything very well. But multitasking really involves being able to bounce around from multiple different projects so that you do them in sequence, but you have to keep them all in mind as you prioritize the use of your time. The next skill which psychologists will resonate with is the interpersonal skill. It's true that I'm not doing psychotherapy, I'm not doing interventions with families or couples, whatever, although I did that earlier in my career. But all of the things I learned about human behavior, about influence, about collaboration, and so on, are relevant in this job. And so I would say that that is probably the most important thing that I'd emphasize in terms of the skills that I use.
So just that ability to interact and understand humans and their behavior and engage with them on a daily basis. That's something you use quite often.
Yes, very much so. And I can elaborate on that a little bit later.
Perfect. So now, thinking about these skills, when we come from graduate school or from whatever level of training that we are, we come with some skills and knowledges and certain competencies that are probably well established. But I've learned even in the number of jobs that I've had that sometimes when you switch into a new job, there's a set that maybe wasn't as important in a previous position, but now you draw upon a lot more. So what kind of knowledge or abilities did you develop or did you learn when you were a graduate student or as a postdoctoral fellow that really helped you move into this particular position, or that you find yourself using a lot?
Well, elaborating a little bit on the comments that I made about interpersonal skills, clearly someone who gets a PhD in clinical psychology, which I did, is very attuned to multiple levels of behavior, motivation. When we study transference and countertransference, or whatever the terms may be, the therapeutic alliance, we need to always keep in mind that that has two sides to it. There are the things that someone else is bringing to me and the things that I'm bringing psychologically to them. And so there's a constant effort to try to see the world through the other person's perspective and also realize what I may be projecting onto a situation, which could be helpful or not. So I think that that set of skills has been very relevant to working in all the different organizations that I've been part of. And related to that is, I suppose you could call it political skill, organizational skill, because I've been in some very large organizations, and when I left graduate school, I worked in a large healthcare system which had a significant political component because it was a medical surgical staff as well as psychological staff. It had inpatient and outpatient and a whole range of services. And so I began to notice then that I was able to understand some of the organizational dynamics that were occurring, and I have seen those same patterns recur over and over again since my first placement outside of graduate school and now up to today.
So that sounds like a skill that, you know, you developed a little bit after you had actually gotten into this field. Are there other skills or abilities that you found, yes, you definitely started working or you got the foundation for them in your graduate training or in your postdoc training, but what really was the day-to-day training or the day-to-day occurrence that really allowed you to develop those skills further?
Well, in graduate school, of course, there was a heavy clinical emphasis, and in my program, we started meeting with clients, patients at the very beginning, you know, very early in the training, and so that was very, very helpful, going from individual work to couple work, family work, group therapy. And then I also found very useful, even though my degree was in clinical psychology, I found very useful the industrial organizational courses that were included in the program. And those helped me understand dynamics of leadership and different sorts of organizational structures and transformation, so that you can think about dynamics from an individual all the way up to a large organizational level and see that some of the same factors are relevant. And so I think that those are things that began in graduate school. And for me, in the postdoctoral training, it was intensified because I did go immediately into a very large healthcare system right out of graduate school. It was intensified there, and then ever since I've been able to further develop those kinds of skills from the individual level all the way up to the organizational level.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit more. If someone was really interested in, you know, working in a type of job like yours, it sounds like there's a lot of things you do. So there's a lot of different opportunities probably. But where would they start looking for these types of openings? Or one of the things I like to think about is, are there certain conferences or are there certain you know, opportunities they might have locally on their own campus or in their own environment where they could start learning about the skill sets and just the type of job that you had? Like, you know, where do people go to gather and learn more about positions or opportunities like yours?
Well, let me start with the most practical thing for jobs within the federal government. USA Jobs, which is spelled exactly the way it sounds. I think most people on the call will be familiar with that. That really is the place to go to find out about formal opportunities. And more, those are the only kinds of opportunities most people would be able to pursue, because the emphasis is for all the agencies and all officials within the agencies to use that process. So that means that you go online and you do two things. You create a federal resume within their system, and they have tools for that. And the second thing is set up ongoing searches that will give you daily results in terms of what's available. And because this call is really about people perhaps looking beyond their core competencies to new directions, be sure that you search pretty broadly for things that might relate and try a lot of different terms. So that's number one. Use USA Jobs. You're never going to waste time on that. You might develop multiple resumes to deal with different kinds of work depending on the type of thing you want to showcase. And so beyond that, there are a number of networking opportunities. If you're interested in strategic planning, there are a number of strategic planning organizations which you can easily Google to identify, and they have conferences. They often have local chapters, and there are various things within the industrial organizational field that some people may be associated with. And then there are public conferences that the government sponsors or that the government hosts, and perhaps there's industry sponsorship, that enable you. There's some associated with FAA, others elsewhere in the Department of Transportation. So those are places where you can go as a private citizen, but sort of mingle with people who are in an agency or a type of an organization you might want to work for. And so I would really urge people to look at both.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that second thing. So they're kind of like job fairs or job like they're not are they work in like professional conferences like where people are presenting their research or doing professional talks, or is it more like a job kind of, a job opening fair, or is it both?
Well, what I'm referring to actually is a little bit broader, and one of the things that's key in terms of being able to go in non-traditional directions is to develop connections with people that you might not otherwise meet. Now, it's true there are occasional job fairs and things that are structured as outreach, but I think what I'm referring to is that there are advisory committee meetings for different agencies where those are of necessity public, and they're advertised in the Federal Register. If you were to Google, you'd find, if you were interested in a certain agency, you might look for meetings of that type and then make a point to go up and speak to some of the people who are involved. And then there are also topical conferences. The Space Organization at FAA has an annual conference where they bring in a variety of speakers, and it's very easy at those meetings to go up and talk to someone, meet someone who's on the staff of an organization, or maybe a more senior person who's been a speaker. So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about, and especially in the era of hiring freezes and limited budgets, it may be very useful to use some of those other means, the conferences that are not focused as job fairs, as ways to meet people, and then of course meet people, follow up with them to say you're glad you met them. Always ask for a card, have a card printed. Even if you're a student, you can have a card with your identifying information, but generally speaking, the burden will be on you to follow up with someone you meet and simply express interest and perhaps suggest a cup of coffee or something like that where you could have a conversation, or at least to understand things that might be available that the agency is doing. You never know who's going to respond to that and have time and who won't, but I would urge people to network widely and find opportunities to meet and learn about what people are doing.
I think that's wonderful advice for two reasons. And one, I wasn't really quite aware of those opportunities, so I thought that's just great to hear about them. And I imagine there could be similar things that happen not just at the federal level, but say at the state level. There's probably similar state agencies that would have to do open statements like that. And I also wanted to take the moment to say that you described in terms of going and talking and introducing yourself is one of the things we talk about in a lot of our career sources, especially in our individual development plan, which I'll highlight a little bit at the end and just remind people. But that's great advice. I'm really glad to hear you talk about that, because I think that's a really powerful way for people to learn more about these opportunities. And so I think that kind of brings us into, before we start going to questions, is there any last minute advice or any thoughts you'd like to pass on to individuals that would be interested in learning more about, federal agency type positions, the FFA, things that you've been doing or things that you currently do?
Yes, there is one point that I want to emphasize, and I think this is something I would really stress people keep in mind throughout their careers, and certainly at this point where they may be actively looking to go in new directions. It's not about you, it's about them. You have to learn enough about what people need, what they're looking for, what organizations need, what individuals within organizations need, to be able to craft a story as to how you can meet that need. Because of course most people are polite, and it's nice that they've met you and you're an aspiring student or a young professional, but in the end it's going to come down to, can you configure your skill set to meet a need that they have, and can you show them that you've done enough research about what their jobs involve and what their agencies or other organizations are doing, that you can actually add value. And that often makes a very big difference. So I would urge people that before you go to a conference, look at who's going to speak, read about their backgrounds, the organizations that they represent, what challenges are they facing, how would your skill set be able to help meet those challenges. And that will set you apart from most people who don't do that kind of background work and then wonder why things don't proceed. So that would be my main suggestion.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, let's roll to some of the questions. And actually, as we've been sitting here, I've seen a number of very similar questions come in, and they reference the fact that you said before you started off in a clinical psychology program, and you ended up in this position at the FAA. And some people even said it sounded very, very industrial organizational in the work. So we've had a couple of questions about how did you make that transition, or a little bit about that transition? How did that go?
Well, first of all, it's true within the field of clinical psychology that many people, I think probably more so now than in past years, are looking for ways to cross over into organizational work, whether it's coaching of professionals in various businesses, or it's organizational consulting. The field of industrial organizational psychology is highly developed and an incredible asset to psychology as a whole. But I think that people both within the IO field and within the clinical field have a lot of opportunities, provided that they follow the rule that I laid out before, which was find out what the people you're approaching need, not just what you want to offer, but what they need, and see where the match exists. And so, yes, it is true that as manager of strategic planning, I'm not doing direct clinical work or supervision or administration of clinical work, nor am I even in an industrial organizational practice of any kind. But I would say that in my case, I found that in my graduate work and in my early professional years, I was pulled more and more in the direction of working on an organizational level. And so if you follow the course of my career, you can see that I really did take a lot of risks, and I stepped out of my skill set and comfort zone to some extent to develop new possibilities that would give me a chance to work with organizations. Everyone can serve. Every psychologist can serve society, serve individuals. For me, one of the most important aspects of that is to be able to help organizations function well, and strategy, which means setting priorities and focusing efforts to achieve outcomes. That's really, for me, foundational.
Excellent. So one of the questions that we got, and one that I hear quite often when I'm out working with graduate students and postdocs and individuals who are looking to make any type of career change, be they new early career psychologists or someone who's nearing their retirement age, and the question is, when they do make that transition into what has been traditionally, what is referred to as the non-traditional setting, a place where you wouldn't expect to find someone with a psychology background or training into one of those new fields. Do you feel a loss of connection to the larger community of psychologists? Did you feel a loss of identity? And if so, or if not, tell us a little bit about what that means or how you handle that.
Well, first of all, I came to Washington from Michigan, from Detroit, on an APA congressional fellowship. And so APA and some of the senior leaders at APA at that time were instrumental in helping me make the first big shift from sort of clinical administration background to a public policy focus that was more organizational than in the mental health or human services field. And so I have been working through APA and keeping my connections with APA from the very beginning. I still keep in touch with people who were congressional fellows with me or who recommended me. Some past presidents of FAA I consider to be good friends. And so I've also kept up with the congressional fellowship get-togethers that usually occur on an annual basis. I can't always go, but I've gone to many. And that's been a great opportunity not only to meet the new fellows, but also to keep in touch with officials at various levels within FAA. And so I think in one sense, I am less connected because I'm not practicing in the field of clinical psychology. and I'm not or nor am I an academic or administrator related to that field. But in another broader sense, I've never lost my connection, and I don't think anyone who makes this kind of change necessarily needs to lose that. It's there to maintain if you choose to continue to develop new linkages with what is one of the greatest professional associations in the world.
Oh, excellent. Well, so it sounds like you're able to manage both, keeping your connections and staying close to feeling, as a psychologist, and still bring that viewpoint into whatever current job that you've probably, or whatever job you had in the past, and what your current job is now. So you've worked at maintaining that relationship, and it's been very rewarding for you.
Yes, I have, and I'll emphasize the same kind of theme I mentioned before when I said that if you want to succeed in moving in a non-traditional direction, you need to identify how you can meet somebody's needs. If you want to maintain contact with APA, you may need to evolve the way that you maintain that contact as your own career changes. And so I think there's always a way to do that if the will is there to pursue it.
Excellent. I think we're going to have time for probably one more question. So I'm kind of scrolling through here what we received. And I think one that I liked was, what advice would you give to, to new graduate students or new postdocs, or help any type of psychology student to think outside of the box when it comes to planning and thinking about their own career in psychology? So, what's the one thing that you would advise to help them think, outside the box of, I was trained to do this one thing, I have to find a job that says psychologist, or I'm not going to be successful?
Well, first of all, I think that it's certainly very appropriate for people who have a specialty to look for jobs in that specialty as one of their options. I think it's always a good idea to think about the more traditional path. But to the extent that a person wants to go in a non-traditional direction, thinking outside the box, the best way to do that is to read about and learn about organizations that are not in the traditional area of psychology that you have focused on. And so read about public utilities, read about government agencies, read about different kinds of businesses, different kinds of activities, and read some of the literature in psychology that's written that goes beyond your own specialty area. There are a number of great journals that FAA has that will deal with a much wider range of things. But I would emphasize the importance of going to websites, reading annual reports, reading about programs, and ask yourself, if I were working at such and such an organization, what are their greatest challenges? What do they need to resolve in order to move forward? What are their officials at whatever level facing, and how can I help with that? How could I help with that? And so rather than sort of looking at your skill set and trying to detach it in an abstract way from the field that you were originally focused on, read widely about other kinds of activities, and that will pull you in the direction of thinking outside the box, because those organizations are outside the box. They're certainly outside the box of psychology and outside what most people are trained in.
Excellent. Well, I thank you. That was great advice, and I'd love to talk more with you on that. But unfortunately, we are out of time. So I want to start off by just taking a moment to thank you for being a part of this conversation today, Dr. Eckert. And I want to send a thank you out to all the listeners who have participated and sent in questions. I wanted to take a quick minute before we close out to just highlight some of the resources that the APA has developed. So first, we mentioned earlier the Individual Development Plan. This is or IDP for short. This is a resource the APA has put together to help individuals map out their career pathway. The APA's 5-step process, the way that we developed it, it's to help guide you through your self-assessment, your career exploration, your understanding your current learning status and where you are developmentally in your field, and then set goals to try and find jobs that are really rewarding and to customize them to your own career plan. Next, if you're ready to start your job search, or you just want to explore more opportunities, we really encourage you to check out APA's online career center site, Careers, and you can see the link for that on the website as well. If you're looking for more career-related information, then please check out the APA's new PsycIQ microsite. This is the site where we're in the process of developing a variety of articles and books and webinars, and that's actually where you can also find recordings of some of the past How Did You Get That Jobs and recordings on emerging career topics. Lastly, I want to let people know that you should be receiving a recording of the webinar in the next week. Just in case you would like to re-listen to it or you missed something that Dr. Eckert or I said and you want to jot it down. So as soon as the webinar is ended, you're also going to receive a very short survey that will come up on your screen. We really encourage you to complete this. It helps us develop these webinars, pick new topics, so the feedback is really, really helpful. And then lastly, I want to plug our next upcoming webinar is on March 14th, and our speaker is Dr. Christina Studebaker. Dr. Studebaker uses her psychology background to evaluate legal cases and to develop trial strategy. So be on the lookout for an email from us shortly about this next one. And then until then, I want to thank everyone for coming and hope you have a great day.